So there's a saying, don't look a gift horse in the mouth. Somebody gives you a good gift, you don't want to critique it. But in your book, you sort of question that idea, particularly when there's some really wealthy givers that may have some questionable motives. Mm-hmm. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, it seems very ungenerous, a lack of charitable spirit on my part to think about criticizing the generosity of a donor. And at the end of the day, I concluded that there were at least two reasons why such criticism is legitimate, and we have to at least put it on the table for conversation. Sure. So reason number one is that sometimes philanthropy turns out to be an effort to distract attention from the source of the money-making or the stink in the money-making. And philanthropy turns out to be a kind of reputation laundering activity. We are told the story of a great philanthropist and all the do-gooding, and we begin to forget about, or even don't even bother looking into, the source of the money-making in the first place. Yeah. And the best example of that today is the Sackler family. The Sackler family is the family behind Purdue Pharma, which is the manufacturer of opioids, which have been chiefly responsible for the opioid crisis, with a whole bunch of kind of skullduggery, at least alleged, in the background. And 2 or 3 years ago, before we learned all this about Purdue Pharma, if you'd heard of the Sacklers, you would have only known of them for their great philanthropic efforts. Their names are on art museums, in universities. And one way of thinking about philanthropy today for a family like the Sacklers, it was a way to bolster their social reputation, to invite the public to hold them in great esteem as donors when there was a whole bunch of problem going elsewhere. Right. For a lot of people who run a nonprofit, there's still a temptation to say, the money might be tainted, but I've got a good mission and I can convert the tainted money into some good outcome. Right. Maybe that's, all things considered, still a good bargain. Sure. And there's a great line.
For the greater good.
For the greater good, exactly. And you can sort of ignore the source. There's a great line, maybe it's Mark Twain, that the only problem with tainted money is that there just tain't enough of it. And you can sort of understand that from the standpoint of someone who's running the organization. Sure. You kind of look the other way if you can get the money. As a philosopher, we're always looking for examples to give that are a way to illustrate a bigger point. So here's one reason you might think there is to criticize someone who's doing something that's good. If I take your watch, it looks like a nice watch, by the way, and steal it, I go down to the pawn shop and get a bunch of money for it. Let's say I get $500 for your nice watch. And then I find a nonprofit organization to give that $500 to. And let's assume the nonprofit organization does a whole lot of good with it. Yeah. And then you come to me and you say, you stole my watch. And then I say, but look at the extraordinary good that has come from the money that I got for your watch. Yeah. Your reaction should not be, well, then we're all good. You'll have a legitimate complaint to make. Sure. And I'll have to repair the damage I did to you. Right. That's how we should think about the Sacklers, I would invite you to consider. Yeah. Made a whole bunch of money from doing something that caused a whole bunch of harm, and it is not undone by their generous philanthropic activity. Right. All right, but that's the first problem. We don't want to celebrate philanthropy if it turns out to be a big kind of con game to distract our attention from the stink in the money-making. All right, but there's a second reason. Even if you thought the money was made totally legitimately, and now a person shows up as a generous philanthropist and wants to make a big donation. And there, I think, we have to understand philanthropy as a simple matter of taking your private money and directing it for some public influence. And if you have a lot of that money, when you try to have a public influence, it's an exercise of power. Big philanthropy, by my lights, is an exercise of power by a rich person to try to have some effect on the public. And if it's a good effect, we celebrate it. Sure. But if it's a bad effect, we don't need to celebrate it. In fact, I think as a general matter, in a democratic society where we consider ourselves equal citizens in sharing responsibility for what we do together, when a rich person shows up and says, I'm a do-gooder, I would like to use some of my money to affect the public, what it deserves is our scrutiny, not our automatic gratitude. And I think what we find over and over again is that big philanthropy from especially rich people is an additional mechanism for rich people to have an outsized say in our common affairs. And sometimes it's good and worth celebrating, but other times it's worth scrutinizing and criticizing.
Do you have a specific example of that as well, in the same way?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the best recent example would be Bill and Melinda Gates, now Melinda French, of course, have the biggest foundation in the world, the Gates Foundation. Mainly, the Gates Foundation gives money away globally for global health, but they have a domestic philanthropic program to improve public schools in the United States. And because they have so much money to give away, and the Gateses have a kind of vision about what would make our school system better, they're having a very significant effect on the way it is that American public education works. And so much so that at least one critic, not me, but I think this is worth calling attention to, says Bill Gates is the nation's unelected school superintendent. He's got a bunch of ideas to improve American education, but you know what? I got a bunch of ideas about how to improve American education. You probably do too. But I can't turn around and sort of convert my ideas into automatic influence, whereas Bill Gates can. And what's more, Bill Gates is not elected. He runs the foundation. You can't decide to unelect him. And furthermore, he doesn't really have competition in the way that, say Microsoft did. Foundations don't have marketplace competitors. The Ford Foundation can't put the Gates Foundation out of business. We can't decide as consumers to stop buying what it is the Gates Foundation has on offer.
Can't unelect him.
Can't unelect him, and you can't boycott him, so to speak, because what you want is his money to run your mission. There's a totally different dynamic in philanthropy than there is in the marketplace or for a public official who actually has to, at some point stand for election and be held to account to the public. So the simple fact of the matter is that big philanthropy is an exercise of power that's mostly unaccountable, not especially transparent, and gives an already wealthy, powerful person a new avenue to exercise power.
A better approach might be for the Gates Foundation to say, here's some money. You guys decide how to use this.
That's right. That's right.
But apparently that's not what's happening.
No, it's the rare philanthropist who says, I got all the money. I'm going to give you a whole bunch of it, but I don't want to have any strings attached to it. You just decide what to do with it. There are a few of them, but that's the rarity.
Do you think that was more the spirit of the Rockefellers and the Carnegies?
No, the Rockefellers and the Carnegies had lots of strings attached to their giving too. They had ideas about what would be an effective way of giving, and the kind of philanthropist who really wants to relinquish their power by saying, "I trust you to make the decisions with it." That's the relatively rare philanthropist.
So it's a power thing.
It's a power thing.
Do you think charitable giving is just turning into a big business for corporations?
A lot of corporations these days try to soften their image or to enhance their image, perhaps, by having a charitable program on the side. We can think of corporate social responsibility or corporate foundations or various ways where you show up at the cash register to pay and you get some option to donate $1 to some local charity.
But isn't that good?
It would seem that it's good. But of course, the motive from the standpoint of the corporation can be to be seen as a good actor in order to get more people to come to shop with them, in which case it's a profit-generating activity to be seen to be generous. Alternatively, the idea that we should try to solve social problems by small bits of generosity at the discretion of our already powerful corporations seems to me a strange kind of bargain for the ordinary person. If I need school supplies because I don't have enough money, do I want to think to myself, I want to depend on Target and the annual school season giveaways that they do? Well, if I'm desperate, of course, I'll take what I can get, and that's nice. But that would not be my first choice about how to solve the problem of not having school supplies. Having someone tell teachers, come in and we'll give you a discount on buying pencils and paper and construction markers for your kids is not a way of running a school system that treats teachers with dignity or kids with equal opportunity. It's an invitation to corporations to soften their image by doing modest giveaways.
Similar to we're maybe not looking at the greater problem as a whole, but rather just trying to put little Band-Aids on some of it.
Yeah. In the United States, we always like to look at the story of the individual. And the story of the individual in wanting to be a good person is indeed worth celebrating, but it can often distract us from the structure of the problem. It can mean that we're looking for an individual hero to come to the rescue rather than to get to the root source of the problem.
This video is inspired by our PBS series, Reconnecting Roots. Connect with me, Gabe McCauley, and Reconnecting Roots by visiting reconnectingroots.com, where you'll discover music, blogs, behind the scenes, our podcast, and more. Join our email list and never miss a beat.